So this chapter is going to be on federal and state legislation affecting dental hygiene practice. The learning objectives are to explain the legislative process in the United States, identify the major bodies of law in the United States, describe the regulation of the dental hygienist, advocate the use of a hygienist without restrictive barriers, and describe the responsibilities of dental hygienists in the United States. So then by the end of the chapter, you should be able to adhere to state and federal laws, recommendations, and regulations in the provision of dental hygiene care, promote the values of oral and general health and wellness to the public and organizations within and outside of the profession. So there are three major areas of laws that really govern public health. And the first one is police power, which are the laws that are enforced by governmental agencies. These are the ones of the regulatory dental boards, the state dental boards, and emergency health operations. This is the one that we're going to be talking about the most throughout all of this. Disease and injury prevention are laws that govern legal activities for disease and injury prevention, obviously. So prevention initiatives and occupational health and safety agency, those regulations that they give us, those fall under the disease and injury prevention laws. And then population law uses epidemiology to analyze health issues such as the environment and community water fluoridation. We don't typically talk about this one too often, but it still exists. Okay, so within the last decade, RDHs in many states have been given the authority to provide dental hygiene without the supervision of dentists. Um, Ever since dental hygiene was first sort of created, I think I'm probably going to be wrong here, but it's like 1915. Dr. Alfred C. Phones, he creates the dental hygiene profession by training Irene Newman, and she becomes the first dental hygienist, right? And so from Connecticut, this profession slowly starts to spread across the U.S., and dentists recognize the need for help in the dental office in providing those preventative services. And, so no longer are dentists just, doing extractions for periodontally involved teeth. They are now having hygienists do periodontal therapy. So it's a big thing. Um, as the profession grows, those associations start to pop up that represent the profession. And so associations are the ones that are working to expand the scope of practice, and the settings. The settings here is really important of dental hygiene practice. And so dental hygienists have been working to have the ability to provide dental hygiene services in any setting without the supervision of dentists. So going into nursing homes and providing dental care without having to have a dentist. What that means for our patients is that, not only are we going to be able to go give them services, but we're going to be able to give it to them at a lower cost. We don't have to charge them for both the cleaning and the exam. All of a sudden, we're just charging them for the cleaning. And while it seems like, it might save them, less than $100, that's significant to certain populations, yes. And then also, by not having the dentist have to come along, our cleanings are also less expensive. They're only paying for our overhead, not the overhead of a dentist, who they're much more expensive providers than we are, right? And one of the things here too is that the providers themselves are changing. So the United States Public Health Service creates a dental therapist model to provide dental services to the Native Alaskan population. And when this happened, it was pretty monumental because it created a mid-level provider. And we didn't have that in dental hygiene before. It's not the same as like a PA, right? Because a PA is sort of like just under a doctor. You have to think of it more like a nurse practitioner sort of position. And so there are certain states that have this mid-level provider. We'll talk about them a little bit more, but it was pretty monumental. Another thing with associations looking to expand our settings, and that they not only expand our settings, they're working to expand our scope of practice. Here in Texas, we've been trying to get local anesthetic, but they're also looking to change the supervision of us from dentists. And so while, of course, we would like to be without supervision, in the best way so that we can be completely autonomous from dentists and provide services within our scope of practice. Changing the supervision doesn't change the scope of practice. And so just because the dentist isn't in the office doesn't mean I can suddenly do root canals, right? That's not what we're trying to push for. What we're trying to say is for me to provide fluoride or for me to do a sealant, the dentist doesn't need to be in the office. I don't need to work at a dentist's office in order to be able to do these things. I have a degree, I have a license, I am certified to provide these services of my own, decision making or my own diagnosis. And that's diagnosing in dental hygiene is a big deal. So back in 2003, the Surgeon General published a report of call to action that asked for an increase in the oral health workforce diversity, capacity, and flexibility. And so this was pretty monumental in the dental hygiene community because it really pushed dental hygiene schools to increase capacity and to get more dental hygienists out there so that we could expand our um, ability to provide services in those access to care, those areas where there were barriers. If there are more hygienists, then they're going to be able to overcome a lot of those barriers through diversity, capacity, and flexibility. So then in 2004, the ADHA, American Dental Hygienists Association, recognized the need for a mid-level entry position for dental hygienists. And they have their model, which is similar to the dental therapists or the dental hygiene therapists that we see from the Native Alaskan population. But the ADHA calls theirs an advanced dental hygiene practitioner. And so it's a little bit different, and it really depends on the state. So every state has different laws. I'm sure you know. Minnesota has a mid-level provider practicing within their communities. Colorado has a mid-level provider. And there are a couple of other states as well that are sort of working toward getting that mid-level, which I think is really great. Okay, so this is a picture of direct access. This didn't come with this thing on the side here. I actually just added this. But I wanted to let you know what direct access is according to what the American Dental Hygienists Association says it is. Okay, so direct access refers to the ability of the dental hygienist to initiate treatment based on their assessment of a patient's needs without the specific authorization of a dentist, treat the patient without the presence of a dentist, and maintain a provider-patient relationship. And it is the position of the ADHA that oral health care, a fundamental component of total health care, is the right of all people. Lack of access to oral health care is a critical issue in the United States due to the disparities in the healthcare delivery system, sorry. Dental hygienists must play a vital role in the solution to eliminate these disparities and assure quality oral health care for all. Um, so since this came out in 2014, it's been updated on their website. The new one, Utah has it, Wyoming has it, and Georgia, and both Illinois and Indiana all have it. So everything that is green are states that have direct access, and the states that are like the teal color do not. And so this is a great way to see that in a lot of states, which is really the direction we're going, they want dental hygienists to be able to see patients, but not necessarily under a dentist at all times. We need to be able to provide dental hygiene services to our patients without the need for a dentist. Now, every single one of these states has mandates as to the level of supervision, as to how long before the patient needs to see a dentist, how many times you can see that patient. So don't get me wrong, just because Texas is green here doesn't mean that you can go and practice without a dentist. That's not what this is saying. Here in the state of Texas, you are able to see a patient and they must get an exam within 6 months of seeing you. Otherwise, you cannot continue to see them. And so, in a lot of areas, you have to see a dentist once a year. That exam sort of lives for 6 months, and then you can see them for up to 6 months before they have to come in again. A lot of offices will work where the dentist is in the office one day, and as long as they had an exam within a year, then you can see them again. But then once that year mark is up, if they haven't had an exam, then you cannot see them for dental hygiene services here in the state of Texas. Okay, so be careful with this law. Okay, so now we're going to talk about laws. The laws that affect dental hygiene practice are enacted and enforced by different states. Each state has their own rules, right? However, the federal government provides a model in which to fashion the state's systems. And so if the state has a regulation that directly goes against what the federal government says, then the state has to correct that, okay? Um, so sometimes what is better is if we go to the federal government and we say, hey, public health hygienists need to be able to do this and this and this and this, and then the federal government will either say, yes, you're right, or they'll be like, nah, go back to your state and figure it out, right? The legislative branch is the one that makes laws for each state, including laws that affect the licensing and practicing of dental hygiene. Each state has two legislative bodies, and they have, as far as the legislative branch goes, there's two bodies of that, the House of Representatives and the Senate. This is kind of a review of your, you know, fourth grade government class, right? And so we all understand the concept of the three branches of government being broken down. And so there's a governor, there's the legislative body, and then there's like the judicial branch and all of that. Oh, good. Okay, so here's a chart breaking all of those down. There's a legislative branch, which in the federal government is Congress, and the state government is the state legislature. Both of these are broken into two compartments as well. So the federal government has the House of Representatives and the Senate, excuse me, and the state government has the same thing. State has the House of Representatives and a Senate. The executive branch, there is the president and the governor, and then in the judicial branch, there are the court systems, the federal courts and state courts. Okay, I know you guys all know this stuff. So the executive branch is the one that carries out the laws passed by the legislature and enforces laws that are made by state legislature. The judicial branch interprets the laws the legislature passes. Judges do not make the laws, but they interpret them. So this is important because sometimes there are certain cases where there's more nuance, and it's not clear, what the law says this, but does that count in this case? There's kind of an exception here, maybe. And so the judicial branch is the one that is interpreting those laws. Here's a wonderful chart. So the legislative body creates the laws, the executive body enforces the laws, and the judicial branch interprets the laws. Okay, so table 6-3, this is in your book on page 86. This is going to break down the four major bodies of law. And so first is the common law. These are created and changed only through the court systems. And so judicial decisions that are many cases that are heard and then they make a decision, and that decision creates a precedence, not a president, but a precedence. And that precedence determines how other judges in other courts make decisions. Okay, so common law is sort of like, yes, this is the law, and this is kind of how everyone else is enforcing it. Then you have statutory law, which is when the legislature writes a written law. And it serves to promote justice, is what your book says. Only the legislature can change that law. So this is like, there's a bill and it's created and then it passes through the House. And you guys have all heard that School Rock. Is it House of School Rock? I don't know. But yeah, I'm just a bill and I'm just a bill and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Anyway, that's statutory law. It's created, it's written, legislature deals with that. And then constitutional law deals with the interpretation and implementation of a government's codified constitution. So there's a Constitution of the United States, it's written, and so constitutional law is where we read and we sort of try to figure out what the Constitution means for us to do in the situations that we have. And so the people, it says through their legislatures, created it. And so then the people, also through their legislators, have the power to change it. This is where, you write your congressman and say, hey, this isn't fair. I want to have this, and this is why it needs to change, right? And your legislature who wants your vote, they will probably, or I mean, they might ignore you or they might do something about it, right? Um, Constitutional law is going to take precedence, or it has more power, right, over both common and statutory. So constitutional law is like the highest up. It's silly that it's on the bottom or the middle here, but it's the highest tier, right? Constitutional law is number one, and then you have statutory law and common law after that. Now, all the way at the bottom, the fourth body of law is administrative law, and it refers to the rules, regulations, orders, and decisions that are created by a government's administrative agencies. Administrative agencies being huge here, right? This is the most important when we're talking about dental hygiene. This is the most important type of law because the you know, the US and Texas and every state falls to administrative agencies to create regulations and rules that govern how certain occupations are practiced. And for us, this falls into the state dental boards. They are the ones who create these laws. And so the legislature has the authority to say whether and when administrative agencies can develop these rules. Now, if something were to happen, like through common law or through statutory law, something was created that went against the administrative, because administrative is all the way at the bottom, the administration would have to change their rules in order to accommodate common and statutory law. Nothing is in the Constitution for dental hygiene, so don't bother looking there. Okay, so laws that pertain to dental hygiene. So the administrative law falls to the administrative agency, which is in our case the Texas State Board. They are the ones who come up with the rules and regulations for dental hygiene practice here in Texas. But that's just in Texas. As soon as you cross that state line, there is another governing body, a dental board, that determines the rules and regulations for dental hygienists in their state. And so, every state is going to be different. This is why every couple of years you have to renew your jurisprudence. Before you get your license, you have to take a jurisprudence test. Pretty much every state. I haven't heard of any states that don't enforce this. But we take a jurisprudence test in order to say, yes, I understand the rules and regulations of dental hygiene here in Texas so that I can practice in Texas. And so the policies that are enacted at the federal law pertaining to dental insurance and Medicaid can sometimes affect that practice, right? We talked about that. If another type of law has a rule or regulation for the somehow that affects the practice of dental hygiene, well, then the rules and regulations from that administrative law through the Texas State Board have to adjust in order to accommodate that higher law there. Statutory laws describe the allowable scope of practice, necessary dental supervision requirements, requirements necessary to obtain a dental hygiene process. I think this might be a license, and then and suspension and revocation of licensure practices. And so what happens is the administrative is the one that comes up with these rules and regulations, and then they give it to the governor. And if the governor signs it, then it's statutory law, right? This happened with COVID, actually. It was pretty awesome to see because when COVID came out, they were very concerned, obviously, and they shut down all they called it elective procedures, which unfortunately dental hygiene kind of falls into elective, right? Because it's not necessarily emergency. And so they shut down dental hygiene practice. But then in order to pick it up again and get it going again, the Texas State Board had to give this huge mandate to everyone. This is how we're going to practice under COVID. This is how dentists are going to practice. This is how hygienists are going to practice per COVID. And so the state board gave it to Governor Abbott at the time. And then he actually said, no, I don't want it like that. You guys have to revise a couple of things and then give it back to me. And so it didn't work, and we couldn't go back to work for like another couple of weeks. And so then the Texas State Board revised their COVID policy and they sent it back to the governor. And at that point, the governor accepted it. And so then hygienists everywhere went back to work. It was pretty cool to see this thing that we know, and it's kind of like a concept in our heads of how this all of this law works, but then to actually get to watch it unfold was pretty cool. Okay, so there's another aspect to that that I probably didn't cover perfectly for you. So through administrative law, they get to do the rules, regulations, orders, and decisions, right? They are the ones who say whether and when, I'm sorry, they are the ones who get to say kind of how everything works, right? But that isn't to say that the legislature doesn't actually write the laws. Like the law is there about, the scope of practice for dental hygienists, but the Texas State Board is the one that kind of they're the ones who decide certain things about how everything is run. They're the ones who give a lot of the information to the legislature, and all of that. Now, another aspect of this is lobbying. So, lobbying is actually just the act of educating legislatures and promoting specific bills that benefit that lobbyist, wherever they come from, right? For dental lobbyists, this could involve supporting legislature to enhance dental care or opposing bills that are detrimental to dental care delivery. And so here in Texas, every year, the Texas State Hygienist Association, they are the ones who they have a lobbyist who goes to legislature and they try to pass local anesthetic. And every year, the TDA, Texas Dental Association, they have lobbyists who they pay to go to legislature and they try to get them to not pass local anesthetic for dental hygienists. And so every lobbyist through they're sort of like representing their whoever's paying them, right? Um, so some lobbyists are just professional lobbyists. They know people, they have connections, they know certain congressmen, or they know someone who works for that congressman, kind of thing, and they just know people. And so they're not necessarily dental affiliate. They don't have a dental affiliation. They're just a professional lobbyist. I knew one of my patients was a professional lobbyist. Every year, she would go, or every other year, sorry, because that's how often Texas sits, that she would go to Austin for a couple of months and she would live there and she would lobby based on who had hired her for that year, and she would try to educate whoever it was based on certain things. Lobbyists are also really wonderful at giving you information on how to get your law into someone's hands. So, they are the ones who talk to dental hygienists and say, hey, that's not working. Let's try this other plan of action. And they're the ones who say, we're going to create, it's called a white paper or white sheet, and it has like certain bullet points of like talking points, things we really need to get across to our congressmen, because congressmen aren't dental hygienists either, right? No, these guys don't know anything about dental hygiene. So we have to educate not only, the legislatures, but we have to sometimes talk to our lobbyists and tell them everything that they need to know about dental hygiene so that the lobbyists can speak on our behalf because they know people. And so most of the time, lobbyists are hired based on their network of connections, not necessarily based on their expertise in the field of the bill that's trying to be passed. Anyway, back to the slide that's currently here, how a bill becomes a law. So you can find this on page 87 in your book, or you can go to Schoolhouse Rock and watch a really great, cute little song on how bills turn into laws. But basically, someone writes the bill, writes the law essentially, and they give it to the House. The House talks about it. It's in committee. Sorry, my dog is barking. And so the bill or the concept sometimes is goes into committee and the committee talks about it. They try to say, how do we get this passed? Is it going to work? Most of the time, a bill dies in committee. It never actually makes it to the floor. And so that's where it ends, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean everything in that bill doesn't continue forward. Sometimes they'll take parts of the bill or concept and they'll put it in a different bill. And that bill might go to the floor and get voted on. But anyway, it makes it through. If it makes it through committee, everybody in the committee, thinks that it's worthy, then it will go to the floor. And then it will get voted on by everybody in the House. If it passes, then it goes over to the Senate. If it doesn't pass, it dies. Um, I'm sorry. And then if it passes, like sometimes the Senate will say, yes, we love it. They'll vote for in favor and it'll go to the governor. But sometimes it doesn't, right? Sometimes they're like, no, I don't know what the House was thinking. I shouldn't have passed this. We need to change this and this and this and this and this, right? If they change it and then still agree to it, right? They're like, oh, we'll take it if we cut out this part, right? They take that revised thing, they vote, they say yes, then it goes back to the House and it goes back and forth however many times it needs to in order for it to go to the governor. And that's how laws work. If the law, I'm sorry, now we need to talk about the governor. So it goes to the governor and the governor reads it and says yes or no, right? If they veto it, right, they say no, this bill is terrible, then it doesn't become law. However, they don't get the end. They don't get the final say, right? Because a lot of people in Congress said yes. So it has to go back to Congress, and if it goes back and they get 2/3 majority, then it passes. So in order for it to pass originally, they only have to get more than half, right? 50%, 51, right? It goes on to the governor. But when it goes back, they now have the obligation to get more than 66% of them to say yes. Um, or it could go to the governor. He or she likes it. They sign it. It's a law. Okay, so then what does the state dental board do, right? They govern dental hygienists. They are the ones who will develop the rules, regulations to interpret or further define the Practice Act. And so every state has a occupational practice act, a dental practice act that they have. There are of our practice act, dental takes up, I think, about 100 of the occupational ones. And so I'll post the ones as far as the regulation of dental hygiene practice and like how dental practice licensure works of the occupational codes. They also grant, suspend, or revoke licensures. I'm sorry, licenses. And so they're the ones who go through the licensure requirements and the procedures that they have to go through in order to suspend a license. And they are comprised of both dentists and dental hygienists, although typically it's mostly dentists and then one or two dental hygienists. Iowa and New Mexico are governed by dental hygiene committees. They're a little different from us. And then in California, they have new legislation that for the first time ever, it's a state dental hygiene committee was granted the full authority to make those rules and regulations instead of their state dental board. But here in Texas, we have the Texas State Board. So here is figure 6-3. You can find this in your book on page 88. And you can see from the chart that Texas has more than one dental hygienist. I think there are two. And then their little circle, like white dot in the middle, does say that there is a dental hygiene committee of some form here in Texas in 1995. A dental hygiene advisory committee was comprised of 3 dental hygienists and 2 public members appointed by the governor and 1 dentist appointed by the board. That was established. They are an advisory committee, so they, talk to the Texas State Board as far as how some of those regulations and things that come out should probably be done. They're kind of part of the information collecting group, and they evaluate information and then they give advice to the dental state board. Okay, so a rule is a statement of general applicability that implements or interprets law or defines the practice and procedure requirements of an agency or a state agency. What does that mean, right? And so while the law might have, certain legalities to maybe the way the educational requirement is for dental hygienists, a mandatory rule would establish the requirement, the fee or fee rate. It sets a standard. It provides a set procedure, pronounces how a law will be implemented, and gives guidance for compliance within the law. It could describe the structure for the organization. It can instruct members of the public on how they have to deal with that agency. It basically it writes all of the stuff you need to know about how to follow those laws. And so you read the law and then you read the rule and the regulation that goes along with it. Some state boards may promulgate rules at any time, provided they follow state law. And by applying the rulemaking process, they can change a rule that it believes should be changed. So they can change rules anytime they want to, and they set those standards. Um, Most state boards are comprised primarily of dentists, one or two hygienists. We talked about that. Dental hygienists in the state are typically governed by dentists. The dentists, usually the majority of the board members, interpret the law to limit the practice of dental hygiene while increasing the functions of on-the-job trained personnel. Unfortunately, in many instances, the profession of dental hygiene has not had the power to affect its own practice, except for in California. Okay, so I know we talked about um, the direct access, right? We talked about scope of practice, but really, supervision is what steps in and says whether or not we can actually do the things that the law says we can, right? That's the way of limiting our practice. And so, even though in a lot of states you can have direct access to the patients without a dentist, there are certain things that have to be done under a certain supervision. And so while, in some states, hygienists can be providers and they can bill and collect money from insurance, like Medicaid, um, there are certain things that they have to do, like they have to be under a certain supervision when they provide some of those services. So even though they're the ones billing and collecting, they aren't necessarily going to open their own practice because they have to have a dentist there with them. And so your book says 14 states have various forms of unsupervised practice. All states have these supervision laws. And so if you turn in your book to table 6-4, that's on the next slide, you'll see this. It's on page 90. I know this is just a review for you guys. So the types of supervision, there's unsupervised, which is independent or collaborative practice, is kind of the preferred term there. Dental practice without any supervision from a dentist. Usually, if there's a dental concern, then you need a dental referral, and you have sort of an agreement with a dentist where, if whatever happens, if we see suspicious carious lesions, things like that, then we're going to send the patient to a specific dentist, and that dentist agrees, like, oh, yeah, that's the hygienist who sends me patients, right? There's general supervision. It means that you practice without a dentist physically present. The patient must be a patient of record of a dentist in some states, and many states have additional stipulations, such as the patient have to have an exam within 30 days prior to or 30 days after that dental hygiene treatment. Here in Texas, it is 6 months. So you can, as long as they've had an exam within the last 6 months, or they're going to have an exam coming up within 6 months, then you can see them. The one prior stipulates it has to be public health setting, so you can't just go into your office and see a new patient without a dentist being present. As far as like the non-public health settings, they have to have had an exam within the last year in order to be able to see them. Indirect supervision means that the dentist has to be at the facility, right? They have to be in the office in order for you to do whatever it is. And direct supervision, it means the dentist has to be in the operatory with you while you do it. And so there are some states where there are things that are mandated with direct supervision where it doesn't really make any sense because the dentist has to be in the room with you. So I don't understand why you'd be doing it, not him or her. But anyway, that's how supervision works. So, in summary, um, power is a responsibility. It's a service, it's not a privilege. The profession supports the concept that to effectively prevent dental diseases, dental hygienists must become empowered in the political process and act as the voice for underserved populations who currently face barriers to care. It's important to understand the federal and state legislation that affects hygiene practice. One, because you're going to be practicing and you need to understand how to navigate what is legal and what isn't, but also because it's your job to advocate for your patients. And through that, it will be your job to advocate for the profession. And I know that a lot of people don't feel like it's their own personal responsibility to become involved in advocating for the profession itself, but I need you to understand that in order for you to provide the most comprehensive care for your patients, you need to be able to practice at your full scope of at the full scope of your education. You need to be able to give them as much of your capability as you can, as much of yourself as you can help them with. That's what we should be doing. That's true service, right? And so with the barriers to care being there, and then us having these constraints on our ability to practice and having to stay under a dental license, that's only creating even more barriers to care. And so it's important that we advocate for our practice or for our profession, and in doing so, that advocates for those patients who don't have access to care and who have those barriers. And so while, a lot of people feel like, why should I join a professional organization? What's it going to do for me? It's not about what it can do for you specifically. It's about what you do for it, and in doing so, what that does for the overall oral health in the United States, what you can do for not just the profession and not just for, your individual patients, but what you do for the community as a whole. The whole reason many hygienists get into dental hygiene is so that they can help people. They can help to give that healthy smile back to patients. And in doing that, and having that goal, if your goal is to help people and your goal is to promote oral health, then you need to be involved, and you need to
Mm.
understand the legal implications, and you need to understand advocacy, because dental hygiene, like, we need you. You need to be a part of this because we need you.